Welcome back. We have another guest lecturer for the real world perspective. We have somebody from the world of human resources, and I will let her introduce herself. Hi, Annette.
Hi, Todd. Thanks for inviting me to your class. Hello, class. I'm Annette Gebicke. I'm an HR rep at a large global organization. A lot of my responsibilities run from recruiting and hiring to some training, working with employee relations issues, maintaining culture within our organization, and ensuring a safe, happy, healthy environment as much as I can.
Well, great. You kind of talked within your role there about what HR does a little bit, but it'd be great to explore that in more detail. So, like, what is HR and what is its function?
Right. So that's a good question. So, in a nutshell, I would say human resources helps to ensure a productive, safe, engaging, profitable business. Our biggest resources are people. Any business needs to make money, and in order to be a profitable business, we need to have employees that are healthy, happy, and motivated to do what needs to be done to get the shipments out if it happens to be that they have product that they're going to build and ship.
So, like, there must be different types of jobs within HR. I mean, how does certainly for a big company, you work for a Fortune 100 company. I'm assuming you're not the only HR person, and there's probably folks that do different types of jobs. I mean, can you explore that a little bit? What if somebody's interested in an HR job? It would be really good to understand the different ways that falls into specific roles.
Right. Okay, you're right. There are a lot of functions within HR. One way to think of it is you might have your HR generalist, to your HR assistant, to your HR representative, to your HR manager, HR business partner, all the way up to maybe a HR director or chief people officer. And it really depends on how large the organization is. When you're thinking about all of those potential roles, when you're down at the HR generalist, you're talking about more tactical work, making sure that the train stays on the track and the business is getting done on a day-to-day basis. As you move up that ranking, up to the higher levels, you have more strategic HR roles where perhaps you are implementing training materials, perhaps you are reinventing the recruiting tools, perhaps you are wanting to ensure the strategic plan is staying current so that the business can continue to be productive while still maintaining engagement within our people.
So can you flesh out a little bit of, what is, you say at the tactical level, on a given work day, you're a frontline HR generalist, you're at work at 8 o'clock. I mean, what are some things you actually do?
Mm-hmm. So it might depend on the size of the organization. If you are in a smaller organization, you might have a range of the tactical, which might be you got to do your payroll, you got to submit your I-9 documentation for a new hire, perhaps, all the way up to, hey, I have to develop this training program for my new hires, or maybe you have to go all the way up to you need to do some workforce planning. There needs to be changes within the organization, and you might be involved in those discussions. If you are in a larger corporation, you might learn that your role is more, I would say, pigeonholed, where maybe a lot of your work, if you're a generalist, a lot of your work would be in the tactical piece where you might be doing data entry of the I-9 documentation, like I said. You might have tasks within the recruiting and hiring piece. Maybe you are in benefits and that's your expertise. If you move up into the HR rep where I'm at, you might see you have a balance of both. I have tactical work that I have to do every day, and no day is the same. I don't know of any HR function or professional who would tell you that every day is the same. Each day is different. You never know what's going to come through the door on any given day. And that's part of the excitement of being in HR, where you get to pivot. You just don't know what's coming up, and you end up with exciting, challenging discussions that happen. And from those discussions becomes action items, right? So perhaps I have a manager that comes to me and has an employee issue. And so that becomes a discussion, and we talk about where we're at with things, where we need to go. And from that point, you move into the tactical piece where you have some documentation to maintain, perhaps.
Okay, so if I'm an employee, well, let's back up a little bit. I'm a prospective employee. I'm looking for work, and I go through the process of being recruited, of interviewing, of getting a job offer, of accepting it, of becoming an employer, about learning about benefits, about having questions, about maybe having issues where I'm upset about something, or maybe I have an injury, I need to go on leave. In many ways, I'm going to be, in many circumstances, I'm going to be talking with my supervisor or my manager. But in other cases, HR is the face, or is at least lockstep with the supervisor or the manager. Can you kind of briefly walk me through that journey of what would be the HR's? Right now, I'm just somebody who doesn't work there, and somebody somewhere inside your organization has said we need to hire a person for this role. So, what is HR's job throughout that journey, and when am I talking to HR?
Mm-hmm. Again, it will depend on the size of the organization. For me, or for my specific role, the journey starts with talking with the manager and making sure that there's an understanding of what skill set is needed. And then we go to the recruiting team and we say, hey, this is a skill set that we need. Can you help us find somebody to do this?
So if I can interrupt from a class standpoint, that'd be that job definition phase. HR might not, each company might have different names for the processes, might have different names for the steps, but within IO psychology, recall we talked about, talking to the class now, recall we talked about the importance of job definition and KSAOs, the knowledge that you need, the skills you need, the abilities you have, and then other characteristics. That's these are the type of people we need for this job. And then there's the task part, and you can look at that as the what and the how that relate to that job, and all that needs to be done when you're defining a job, so that you can go find people, and it should still be done periodically within job, as markets evolve, as culture evolves, as business processes evolve, and you need to be revivifying that job definition. But okay, so you're participating in that. So there's some process stuff, forms to approve, things to click and check and make sure that various people are approved. There's a budget. Now we can move forward. And you're working with the manager to help make sure you've got a proper job definition, right? And that we know what we're looking for. Okay, keep going from there. And I might interrupt with a few other examples if it's relevant.
Absolutely. So as we pull in candidates, they get ranked. The recruiter will compare their skill set.
So back up a little bit. Now, how'd you get candidates? Does HR typically farm that out to the finding, posting, and that sort of thing? But is HR typically lockstep involved or point on getting candidates? And how do I know to find? Now I'm that prospective candidate. Did you do something to make sure I found you?
Did I personally?
Or you HR.
Yeah. Yes. So the recruiting team for my organization, the recruiting team is in charge of ensuring that they're pulling in, finding you as candidates, right? If you're going to go on to LinkedIn or if you're going to go on to Indeed, you're going to see that job description. You're going to click on the link and you're going to apply. That connects you to our recruiting team and to the job itself. And that's where the next step is, where the recruiter will match the skill set, determine if you're 80% match, 100% match. That's just an example.
Throw me some match. What are you matching? And how do you know it's matched? And what information am I giving you? And how are you asking me for that information?
Right. For example, if on the job description or job requirement is you need to have 5 years experience doing C plus engineering role, for instance,
So
but you
for the
only
record, that's a programming language or C++, and not a grade, right?
correct,
We let
correct. C plus plus.
yeah, C++
Just an
is a
example.
programming language. Keep going. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. And then, but maybe the person only has 4 years. And so it wouldn't necessarily throw that candidate out of the pool. It just would be they might not be quite as high in that C plus plus as another candidate, but they have the other requirements or preferred skills. And so they get moved into the next phase of manager review, where the manager then reviews the resumes and basically gives a second set of eyes on the skill set to make sure that, yes, this person looks like they would be a good fit. And then we move to the interview stage. For us, we have interview panels where we have two teams of two. So it's an hour per interview, and each of the interviewers score. Our hiring process is targeted selection, which is behavioral interviewing versus just there's different types of interviewing styles.
Yep.
Ours
Yeah,
is happens to be
we've covered that. We've definitely covered behavioral interviews. So you'll have subjects within an interview that might be like you might have identified like decision making as an important behavior, and you might have a situation in the interview where you're going to be asking the candidate, give me a specific example in your work experience where you maybe had to make a hard decision that maybe not everybody will be happy with, or whatever. You'll craft it as a situation that ask for, solicit a situation, a specific real situation where the candidate can give a narrative, and you're looking for how did this person behave in that situation around the topic. And then this example I gave would be like decision making, if that was considered key to this, one of many that are key to this job. And then the panelists will give a number score for that.
mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, yes, they all give scores, generally anywhere from 2 to 5. And then what happens after that is the HR rep gets involved again. There's what might be called a recap, interview recap, or sometimes it's called a data integration process, where we all come together, the interviewers and HR rep, and we review the scores. We come to a consensus in that process by talking about strengths and gaps that might be present. And also, one of the biggest important factors for the HR role in this process is to weed out bias. Perhaps the interviewers know who the candidates are. And so we need to make sure that they're not thinking about, well, I saw this person performing at this level during this project. They really need to be focusing on what evidence did that candidate give us at the time during this interview? What examples did they share with us, and what did they tell me? What did they show me how did they demonstrate that they could be successful in this role? And that's what HR kind of helps to weed out to make sure the selected candidate is chosen.
So, in the example that you gave, where someone on the panel might have actually sort of been witness to the thing they're talking about, that would be an example of internal candidates, which is part of the mix. Sometimes you'll have candidates that you really don't know very well, other than what they've given you as a face, what's on their resume and what's on LinkedIn, and then it's just the words they say. But oftentimes you'll have candidates that are internal candidates where they've already got a great deal of reputation established within the organization. Without trying to tangent us too much, to what extent, if let's say you got a job, you've posted it, and you have internal and external candidates, and you go through the interview process, and the hiring manager is part of that, and presumably people that might be peers to this person, or some other types of stakeholders are also interviewing these people. And let's say you got then 4 people. You said 2 and 2, and then HR is also involved, and you're having this consensus thing about how do we feel about scoring. So if I'm the hiring manager and I go, okay, yeah, I agree this internal candidate had a lower score versus this external candidate, but this is the scores are scores. I like this person, and I know this person, and this other person that scored well, I really don't know them. Can't we just hire this person? Let's just make the scores higher. What is that okay? And if not, why not?
Right. That's a very, very good question. I'll cover a couple of things there. So when we go back to me saying that they need to focus on what they interview, what's happening in the interview, what's being demonstrated during the interview, that's why it's important, because if you do have an internal, external, we need to have them on the same playing field, right? You might know them, but we need to give the same fairness. We need to come in with a fresh set of eyes, listen differently than maybe you would on a regular day-to-day basis with those people that are in the interview. So the external candidate has the same opportunity to potentially be the selected candidate. And that's important because sometimes the external candidate is the best candidate because they have a different perspective to bring to the organization. Maybe there's a skill set that they have that we don't currently have in an organization. And in a hiring manager, we'll go back to your question, Todd, of what if the manager has, I'll call it a bias to this internal candidate? I would challenge that manager and say, well, that's where your organization is now. You already know how that person will function in that role. Maybe, maybe not. That person could be the selected candidate, the perfect candidate. But have you truly considered this other outside perspective where maybe this person has some continuous improvement experience with software, with projects that we haven't had here before, or we have and maybe haven't been as successful? We could possibly bring that external candidate in, and then your organization then grows from where it is to a higher level. It is important to consider outside perspectives. Sometimes we get stuck in what we do every day and not challenge ourselves enough on just because we do it today doesn't mean we should be doing it this way tomorrow.
Sure. In the class, we've talked about employment law and discrimination. Does HR consider itself gatekeepers in that perspective, and for lack of a better word, an enforcement and corrective mechanism to make sure that the letter of the law is meant, and then the values that are typically behind the framework that justify the law, that are typically also part of the values framework of the organization, are adhered to through the process, and if so, how does HR know it's doing that, and what is it?
Right.
How can it prove it did that?
Right. So very, very good questions. But the quick answer is yes. We have all of that to consider. Our hiring practices are consistent and aligned. So no matter what unit you work at within my organization, the HR rep and the recruiter are doing the same steps all the way along. In addition to that, we have internal and external audits to make sure that our hiring practices are being followed. We'll get challenged if there's any potential discrepancy that would be questioned, and we would have to be accountable for what that exception might have been, should there be one. Also, I'd like to come into this, Todd, and talk about the DEI piece, right? So DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a big culture shift, not just within our large organization, but really the nation, the world. I mean, we are really wanting to be a more inclusive culture. And in doing so, that's part of our hiring processes as well. We want to make sure that we are finding those candidates that aren't our typical candidates. If you have an organization in a small city where there just is not, there's a lack of diversity, even maybe male, female perspective, right? We need to find out where we go. Where can we find these diverse people? And not that they're different than anybody else. They just have a different perspective than what the organization might look like today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it also it's a good example of the complexity and the need for HR to make sure that it's guiding hiring managers through the process, because you have, I mean, the federal law on discrimination, is pretty specific in that the actual decisions you make, employment practice decisions. So it isn't just who you hire. It's as we've explained in the class. It's who do you decide gets training or development, and all sorts of, who gets promoted, and the various various managerial decisions you make that are manifest asymmetrically, which is to say that not everybody gets the same thing. If you're making those decisions along protected class decisions, it can be a violation of federal law, and so you need to ensure that you're hiring the best, most qualified person, and you're not violating federal law. But at the same time, sometimes the aggregate effect, when you actually look at how do you as an organization reflect the diversity of the population, and if you find that it's pretty monoculture, it's at an aggregate level that can be used as sort of evidence that you are biased in your hiring, even if you've been successful on the individual basis at not being charged or sued. So you've got initiatives in most of corporate America anyway, at wanting to cast our nets as wide as possible, bring in diversity, let the wisdom of the crowd, the effects that you get from broader perspectives, make that a strength. It's also part of an emerging, more explicit value framework in our broader culture. But at the same time, you got to make sure that you don't have a hiring manager that goes and violates federal law by says, oh, we need somebody, I guess, from this group because we're not as diverse there, so let's hire that person a little bit. You can't do that, and so you've got to have HR, and you've got to have the depth of their knowledge domain. You've got to have their perspective. You got to have their corrective measures in the organization to make sure that they can help the hiring managers navigate the embracing of a more diverse workplace, at the same time making sure that we're being true to the principles of that are behind the federal law in terms of hiring the most qualified. So it's really challenging, and people forget that sometimes that a hiring manager, they're only a hiring manager when they're hiring. Otherwise, they're a manager. It's not. And if they're not in a constant growth mode, there's times, I've been a manager for a few decades, and there have been times when I've gone like a whole year and we didn't hire anybody. Well, I was not a hiring manager. I'm a manager. So you don't end up in that hiring process a lot, and so and there's new ones, new supervisors, new managers. You've got to have the professionals within HR to guide through the process, because they have to be the gatekeepers and the stewards. To make sure that companies don't get in trouble, and at the same time that the best things emerge, the best practices are used. So I'm preaching to the choir here. Is there anything more you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add to that, Todd. We had a hiring manager, had a really good, diverse candidate, and was the top scorer in that data integration. And he said, but I don't understand him very well. It happened to be a male. And I said, so we explored that a little bit further. And ultimately I challenged him. I said, his pace of speaking is not his problem. It is for us to adapt. If he is truly if he's truly the top scorer and he demonstrated the ability to do this job, then it's our responsibility to learn from him and to adapt to what he has to present. Maybe for him, we talk too slow, and so he's going to have to adapt on the other side. So just because you're not comfortable with maybe somebody's style should not be a reason why somebody is not selected.
And if you look at the demographics in the U.S. and you look at population and birth rate, and you look at demand for certain types of jobs versus supply, you know, I'm an engineer first, and been in some form of the tech world most of my career, and I know that you work for a company that hires a lot of engineers. There aren't enough of them, and that's just one. I mean, go to Chipotle, there aren't enough people there too, and it seems like there's like two forces at play that are going to make this embracing of diverse candidates, and this, like your example of which is could be looked at like, how do we be more accommodating to the differences and not be picky about just people that we easily get or seem to be a real strong fit or whatever. We've got an emerging cultural value framework that is saying that we need to be more diverse, and then a list of reasons why. But at the same time, we also have very compelling supply-demand issues that that mean we have to be broader in cast nets wider. Maybe think about developing people internally more, just because of reduced options. It's just companies, whether it's a giant a multinational or a small franchise, Subway, who have to work a lot harder now. And it doesn't seem to get good candidates. And it used to be, if you had a good business idea, you'd win in the market. Now it's like, if you've figured out a way to get good people, just
Right.
making sandwiches, you'll have a winning business, because that's the hard problem. Have you seen that shift in your career, and do you agree that looks like that's actually going to get harder?
Yeah, it's multifaceted. One element of that is the organization itself might have to consider how to do things differently. What do we keep doing? What do we stop doing? What do we need to start doing differently or better, right? The other piece is, how do we not only attract new talent, but how do we keep them engaged and want to stay here, right? How do we retain them? And that part is our culture, right? Giving them hopefully they have the passion for what we do. And beyond that, we help support them by having a healthy, engaging environment to work within,
So we've talked about employee resource group. I have a lecture on retention, and we talked about how there's usually groups that work on sort of the enrichment activities, and retention is becoming more and more of a focal point.
Right.
First, stop the bleeding. If you're in a hole, stop digging. I mean, keep the people. If you have a problem not getting enough talent, first of all, keep the talent you want to keep. And if you're losing them, you've got an issue. It might be strictly pay based, but usually it's multifaceted. And if a super competitive, profitable company is scarfing them up, and you can't afford to match, what can you do to make to drive up their engagement, to create a better sense of a stronger in group? And so maybe we flesh that out a little bit more.
Yeah.
On HR's role as stewards, protectors, and sort of guides to help shift when necessary the overall culture of the organization. Is that a thing that comes along as part of all the steps HR does, or are there times when HR is deliberately engaging in something that is aimed at the organization's culture?
It is very deliberate. It's one of the reasons HR needs to stay relevant in what's happening in the marketplace, right? So and it's always, HR is a partnership, right? We have a partnership with our employees, a partnership with our managers. So in this case, the manager might help by recognition, right? Giving them a good review, and they get a bonus because they were very successful during the year, right? But then HR has to do more than that. We got to consider, do we need to increase our benefits? Do we need to expand them? Are we including all groups that need to be included? Do we have to consider more remote opportunities? Do we have to have a more flexible workplace where maybe they work a couple days in the office and a couple days out? Or what does that look like? HR has to be deliberate in knowing and understanding what's happening in the market and what their people within the organization are telling us they need.
Okay, it's a great answer. I think I want to go back to make sure that we cover our bases on my little journey from a potential recruit. So now we've gone through the interview process, and I think you gave some really good examples that we now know who we're going to hire. You've got an offer letter, and you've got acceptance and onboarding and that sort of thing. Is HR point on any of those activities, and is there any like critical role that HR needs to play on that whole? We're going to hire you, we're going to pay you this much and these kind of benefits, and here's where you're going to work, and you need a computer and file access, which I presume are other departments. But just
Right.
briefly, like, what are the HR touch points in that selection? And we've talked about selection, and the onboarding, and we've talked from one of the things in the retention lecture we talked about is the importance of first impressions, in terms of how you feel about this, when you're, hopeful, but also maybe a little like watching out as a new employee, that whole first experience. You want to walk us through that just a little, just briefly?
Right. So if you're in a small organization, the HR role will be much more hands-on, where you probably will manage all the way from the offer to when they come into the front door. For our organization, it's a partnership between HR and the manager, right? So, of course, HR rep would get the offer going, get it extended to the manager. The manager actually has a conversation with the employee or the potential employee, presents the offer. If they sign it, then HR again becomes involved. And for us, we send out an email. We have contact on a regular basis with the candidate. So up until their first day, right? So there's email communications. They have our email address. They have our phone number. They can call at any time during signing of the offer to coming into the front door. When they come into the front door, we kind of hand it off to the manager again to be that point of contact. And that's because we have, not only are we a global company, but where Todd and I work, we have multiple facilities, in a small range. Well, you can't be at 2 or 3 places at one time. So we need to partner with the managers so that they can connect with the new hire, bring them on. But then we have our new employee onboarding. We call it NEO, new employee onboarding. And there, again, we're the face for them, to walk them through what does this look like being here at our company, talk through payroll and benefits, and at a high level here because we're a large organization again. But we give them a full high-level overview of what our organization is, what they can expect from us. And something special that I think we do that I don't know that other companies do, or not all do, I know that for a fact, and that is, in addition to our new employee onboarding session, we have benefits session for them. And so we have an expert in our benefits department come and talk with our new employees so they have an opportunity to ask questions. How do I sign up? Where do I sign up? Can you explain this to me? That to me is a really high engager for our new employees, to help them feel that they are part of the team, that they have support, especially in a large organization where it's easy to maybe feel like you're a fish out of water.
So I'm hearing there's quite a bit of process, quite a bit of steps. If you want to manage it right, and you want to ensure people come in equipped to do their job, a great first impression, their engagement is really high, and you've set everything up for success. And it's also clear that during the interview process, the structure of the interview is itself sort of an HR created constraint that the panel has to work within. How about so I've been hired, I'm onboarded, things are great, and now it's been a year or so, and it's time for my performance appraisal by my manager. Briefly, like what is HR? Is HR involved in that, and to what extent? What does the manager actually use to do that appraising, and when and how would HR get involved in that?
Mm-hmm. So one of the first things HR does with the reviews is set up the timelines. When do they need to be done? What step does the employee have to have their comments in? What step does the manager need to have theirs in? And has HR and upper management had a chance to review this, I'll call them scores, right, or ratings, before they get submitted to compensation, right?
So you're talking about comments, and I've given some examples in lectures on performance appraisal. So okay. You have a system where the employee does a kind of self-appraisal and the manager does a response and their own sort of appraisal, and you've documented both. And then a rating is developed. Is that a so I talked about like the 1 to 4 in various 1 to 5 in various ways to describing that is probably the most common, at least in corporate America. So there's some sort of rating that's given, but if I'm the manager, am I just like writing something on a Word document, or am I using am I further constrained in order to make sure that this is done right and documented? And is HR responsible for that structure? You want to talk about that just a little bit?
I will. First, I want to just mention about the employee piece. Some organizations, you have to do a review twice a year, some are once a year, right? Whether it's once or twice a year, a challenge that employees have is to remember all the good things they've done over the year, so they are self-advocating for themselves. The manager's piece of that is to kind of hold them accountable and say, oh yeah, I remember you did this, right? They're going to review it. They're going to look at a leveling guide, perhaps. We use leveling guides where we'd have the ratings, and then that tells the manager whether or not they're meeting those expectations. And that will help take out some bias, both for the employee and the manager, to just stick to what has happened, what is the result, right? The manager so uses this leveling guide, and then they need to have conversations with the employee. Once the employee puts their comments in, we happen to have a system. It just pushes automatically to the manager. Manager enters their comments. Then they end up with a discussion and come to terms on if there's a disconnect between what the employee is expecting and what the manager is seeing. And hopefully, the goal is that they're on the same page, right? But that's not always the case. And that's where the manager's job gets a little more challenging to share why or why not something isn't what the employee expected. HR's role is to make sure that these meetings and I'll call them calibrations happen in a timely manner. And we're really kind of the gatekeepers, the cheerleaders, this is what we do next, because managers have a hard job already. They have their day-to-day job, and then they have their job of like, hey, I have to take care of these people too. And HR is there to help support that role.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah. So there's the HR is the creator of the structure, the guide through the structure, the gatekeeper of making sure things are done appropriately, both for the interviewing and for the what might be called performance management elements of it. Even though the hiring manager is the one that is getting a new person on their team, and the hiring manager is the one that has to provide the feedback, and the employee has to provide their own self-assessment. But HR's got structure and defined processes and sort of rules that you have to follow to make sure that we make the best of the situation, and at the same time we don't do anything that could get the company in trouble or set us up for a lawsuit, or otherwise just leave a disaffected, have a person that's upset by the whole system because it seems unfair or arbitrary or biased. And let's go with that example to kind of finish the whole my hypothetical experience, being hired and working and all that. What are the circumstances in which I might knock on HR's door? When obviously a real circumstance might be I got my performance appraisal and I am completely in dismay and disagreement and think that my manager is full of it and doesn't understand my excellence, and why,
Right.
and it's not fair. I might come and say, I don't agree at all with this, and I'm going to quit if something's not done about it or whatever. I think people understand that HR kind of becomes the place people might lodge a complaint with. But surely there's more things. Can you give some examples of when does somebody knock on HR's door, either because they just instinctively know that they go to HR, or where it's like specifically told, if you have this kind of issue or that kind of issue, like I have a question about benefits, I'm typically gonna find an HR person. Give some other examples.
Sure. I'm going to take a step back for a second, just because we talked about the review, and this is one of the most important times. If an employee actually doesn't perform well or isn't performing well, hopefully it's not the first time the employee is hearing that there's a problem, but it might be the first step, second, third step to a journey to try and make improvements for that employee. Sometimes it's called a performance improvement plan, perhaps. So I just wanted to point that out, that it's a means to address issues.
So that sounds like another process that HR helps to define and helps to walk the people through, is if somebody's got poor performance, or at least a manager is asserting this person has poor performance, and with HR, with maybe even upper management is yes, I agree with your assessment here. There's a more formal processes that HR will help help managers and employees go through to try to correct that, and with an improvement plan. And then presumably a good portion of those folks who are having performance issues will come out of that okay, and some of them don't. What's HR's role for those unfortunate circumstances where people are not making their necessary improvements, and how does HR guide people through that process?
Right. So we're very active in that piece. We work with the manager to help work with the employee. Clear expectations are set. A lot of discussions are had before we get to the point of this isn't working for an employee and the business. And so then we have an exit, I'll call it exit strategy. It depends on your organization on what that looks like. Right. I'm not at liberty to share all the details of that for my organization.
But I can volunteer for a broad. It could be, companies sometimes will simply say, "This isn't working. I'm sorry, you're done." Companies might say, "You really should seriously think about finding another job. I mean, we're not going to let you go today, but if we'll let you kind of go on your terms." And some might be, "Hey, we got a deal for you. If you agree to quit and sign this paper." By this paper, we're not firing you. You're quitting. You don't have to say you got fired, and we'll continue your benefits by X, and we'll even give you a certain amount of pay based on it's often called a package. There's varying ways that people do it, but ultimately, what I'm hearing is that regardless of how it is done for different organizations, HR is basically taking a lead role in how that is structured, how that is executed. So for the protection of the business, for the fair treatment of the employee, and hopefully for the learning experience for the manager. And so we've kind of gone through a full journey, and let's turn it back around and not have it on those rare times where it's negative. Talk about the interplay between. So say I'm now not a prospective employee. I'm a really awesome employee that was just hired, promoted to be a supervisor. I'm a first time supervising people, and then like walk me through the journey to if I move up the chain, so to speak, into more higher leadership roles. How am I interacting with HR, and does HR view itself as having additional roles when it comes to stewarding, educating, supporting a leadership at the various levels?
Yes, we do. In fact, similar to like going back to your question about when do employees come to our door, the managers, it's not just employees coming to our door, it's also managers, right? So an employee might come to our door because they have, like you mentioned, benefits, right? They need benefit. They got married, a life event, and they need to go to benefits and change their policy, perhaps. Maybe they have a personal issue they don't feel comfortable talking to their manager about. So they come to HR. Maybe they have a compliance complaint. They might come to HR. We are here to support employees and just be open to whatever they bring to us and help them, support them however we can. And we do the same for the managers. With the managers, however, I go back to the word of partnership, where we work together to help our employees, right? We learn together. We promote change together. Perhaps, like an organization, I brought up the diversity, equity, inclusion. We have a lot of trainings on that. We want to become more aware and responsive and inclusive, right? And so manager, especially a new manager, like you mentioned, may not have any experience with that and not know like how to start a conversation. Where do we start with this piece? And so HR can help guide them, give them their own suggestions, give them trainings, lead them to where trainings exist within our modules. Being a large organization, we have quite a large library of trainings. But basically, if a manager has a question, it's probably they're going to go to their manager or they're going to come to HR on guidance of how do I deal with this situation that I haven't dealt with before.
Great. Okay, so let's bring it back to the students here. And a number of the students are business majors. And some of them maybe have declared but are undecided. What would you say to either a undergraduate version of yourself, some time ago, or the students here that might, now that they know what HR is in much more detail? This has been a fantastic conversation. And they're thinking about it. Are there things that would be unique to the perspective of somebody thinking about this as a career that you'd want to highlight? Is there anything from your own journey of how you found yourself in HR and have progressed, and what would you have told yourself at the start of that? Any general advice or perspective you want to give to people considering a career in HR?
Absolutely. So I won't go into how I ended up in HR. I will just give you the shortened version, which is I really enjoy office management work, detailed work. So that's the tactical piece. And I absolutely love psychology. And so those two kind of marry within an HR role. But the benefit is if you were a psychologist, you might have really difficult situations that are hard to walk away from. If you're in an HR role, you still work with people. You're still helping them in different ways, but you don't necessarily have such of the heaviness that psychology can bring, the mental illness, that sort of thing. Not that it doesn't come into play in the corporate world, it does. But on an everyday basis, it's not so heavy. You can leave your work at home. or you leave your work at work and you go home and live your life. And that's works for me. I just like that I like detail. I like technology and all of the systems that we use. I mean, there's data-driven information that we use to make improvements in HR and the organization itself. So I would say it's office management, psychology, and you get a little bit of technology with that mix.
That's a great answer. And this real world, I've been telling people throughout the lectures that the way in which IO psychology is typically implemented in the work world, and this course is called Psychology Applied to Work, is usually through the HR department in their policies and practices and knowledge domain, as well as in leadership. And it does come back to psychology. And if you look at the topics of this class, most of those things have found their actual application via the Human Resources Department, or at least the Human Resources Department is the steward and the guide, even if it's something that, say, a leader is doing, or the employee, because of career development. I mean, most organizations now look at career development as something that they need to have the employee, the worker, have more agency on, so you sort of own your own path, and that the organization is there to help and support you, but you've got to walk forward, and we will help give you tailwinds, kind of thing. So in that regard, the aspects of career development that come out of biopsychology are geared towards the employee. But this is a great conversation to give context, real world examples of what we've been talking about. And maybe one final thing to talk about before we wrap up is and this will be a future lecture, which is mental health at work. It seems to be emergent in the past few decades, and people still argue, are mental health issues, anxiety, depression, those sorts of things, are they increasing in frequency, or is our comfort as a society in being able to talk about that and destigmatizing, and the normalization of that, and the recognition that we're all different, and we all go through struggles, and that it is quite actually normal. Nothing abnormal about having having issues with mood or anxiety or even motivation or attention. Is in your career, have you seen more awareness and emphasis in mental health at work? Anything any perspective you want to share about how you see that as having changed, and maybe where it feels like it's heading, and anything else you'd want to add?
Well, I like what you've said, Todd. It's very, very real. Everybody, like you said, has their issues, right? Everybody has something that they have a challenge with. And you can't walk into an office and just pretend that whatever's going on at home isn't going on, right? Or whatever's happening with you internally isn't happening with you because you walked into the office. It comes with you. And you have to learn how to balance that, work with that. HR comes into play there at times, where we need to help support. When needed, we need to help them help the employee find resources so that they can help themselves. I think the most important thing, as we talk about psychology in HR, is emotional intelligence. I don't know if your class knows this term at all, but it's basically your ability and your awareness to be able to control your own emotions and handle interpersonal relationships empathetically and fairly. And you, especially when you're dealing with mental health, that's serious, can be very serious. And to have that empathy for somebody, and to work with the managers to know that, hey, this person has an issue, even though you can't tell the manager perhaps what that issue is, the manager needs to know that something's going on, and that they need to also be aware that maybe temporarily a work arrangement has to change so that the employee can take care of themselves and can be still productive and motivated when they're ready, perhaps to come back to work, or to, like I said, to balance the two. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
a bit?
it hit on a couple points, which is, some things require a great deal of privacy, and sometimes that's even federal law. It might not be it might not be obvious to some of the students, but a lot of things fall under the HIPAA laws. And if somebody is confiding to HR, or maybe if the large organization maybe even have health professionals as part of their organization, there might be actually federal law applying of who can know that information, and even outside of federal law, there's still just good practices that align with the value framework of the organization that around privacy, and
Right.
being inclusive does not mean you have to advertise what's going on. Some people want to feel safe where they can come and share that the reason my performance review is really bad, and I want to talk to you about. I want to share something very difficult and that's going on in my personal life, or my health, my physical health, my mental health, my marriage, my kids, something that's just, unfortunately has impacted my work performance, and I need help, or I just need some tolerance and forgiveness and time as I work through that. Not all of that is to be shared, and part of HR sometimes is to be that confidant and to help guide to like an external assistance program, external counseling, and we didn't touch on it, but substance abuse and addiction falls into this oftentimes. I've worked at a number of places, and I've had to fire people in my career, and the times in which I've had to fire people that had a substance abuse and addiction element of it, or at least within my hierarchy, that one of my supervisors in the past, in previous jobs I've had at other organizations. It is a common factor in job performance going south, and if you can stop that, if you can catch that early, and if you can create an environment where an employee is willing to talk, both a good leader and HR, in most organizations, I mean, they have some tools to bring, and usually that's to help guide the person to external professionals, and in some cases, some organizations will even pay for that, because to course correct somebody who's spiraling down, and sort of resurrect them, so to speak, as productive employees. Not only is that a good thing to do as a human being, but it's often the most profitable path versus a 2 or 7 year spiral of like an alcohol addict, as the performance becomes more and more impactful, and that's costing the company more and more money and lost productivity, in some cases really bad decisions that some people make, as well as liabilities. So there's a lot of good reasons to try to course correct that. So it seems to me that anybody that thought HR was there to just take your resumes, or there to tell you what forms to fill out, hopefully has a much richer perspective of how many touch points HR has to an employee's journey, to a leader's journey, how critical their role is as sort of protectors of the realm, so to speak, as a pathway that best practices get into the organization, and that HR would then be a source of change, a source of new best practices to be brought in, stewards of the culture. There's many aspects of HR that are fascinating. It is absolutely critical to the success of an organization. If we want to go way back with the class, we had the scientific management and Taylorism, the original task view. People are cogs. People are lazy cogs, and if we just stick them in a machine and create the right performance and punishment, that they'll act in a certain way, and everything was on the how. But that the human relations era came in and said, okay, the how matters, the task matters, but these are people here, and a motivated person that's respected will give you a whole heck of a lot more than somebody who's treated as a cog. And today we still have these two things: the what and the how. The task and the human side, HR is in every organization, and it is the result of that whole human relations era. And it is, while Taylorism, so to speak, and scientific management, foundationally there's elements of it that's still there in metrics of an organization and defining a process and all that, but the fundamental assumptions of humans or cogs has died, whereas the human relation era has just grown and hasn't, this is my assessment anyway, hasn't really had to do any major pivots in terms of their fundamental understandings. Anyone that is interested in this area, I encourage you to explore it more. And you heard from Annette how psychology is integral to all of this, because of those humans. Pesky humans are everywhere, and we're really, really complicated. And so developing a subtle, complex way to navigate humans is actually a job skill. And companies will reward you if you have those at a high skill level. So this was an awesome conversation. Is there anything we think we didn't cover that you want to mention?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the motivation of employees and just point out that majority of the HR job is really seeing the success of employees. I know we talked about some of the negative aspects because those are important, but what also is important is watching the success of our employees continue on their development path. And majority of people are motivated, happy, engaged, and want to do the right thing at the right time. And so we get to see a lot of positivity within the HR world as well. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, that's a great for perspective in terms of what the bulk of it is. And in my experience as a manager for many years in many different types of organizations, my experiences with HR have been extraordinarily positive. And the long-term perspective that I have of having worked with HR for many reasons, for lots of circumstances, is seeing the flourishing of the people really would be the best reward, and it is, in my experience, where HR is usually pointed at. There's problems that have to be dealt with, but the more you focus on the flourishing, the more you focus on making an environment where people are motivated and engaged, actually the less problems you have that actually require HR's gatekeeping and role. So the more everybody focuses on maximizing the work environment for human flourishing, the more that becomes a self-fulfilling virtuous cycle, or a reciprocal causality, as I've mentioned in class a few times. So this has been awesome. Thank you very much for the time that you spent giving us real-world examples of how IO psychology manifests itself in the HR department, the variety of roles for people in HR, the importance of psychology. All of these real-world examples were awesome, and I know that the class found it very valuable, that I'm not just teaching abstractions. And so thank you, Annette. Thank you very much for your time. This has been great.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.